Welcome to Lead Today with me, Kalina. Let's talk leadership. Hello and welcome to today's episode. We'll be chatting about relocating to Texas and what that entails, whether you're American wanting to change states or you're from out of the country. This is for you if you're thinking Texas. I can honestly say, if you asked me 5 years ago, Texas was not on my radar. The thought process really began when I began my business, chiefly in 2020, and it's an American business, and so we were looking for where to be based out of, and we were also considering where we wanted to live. Being Canadian, well, actually, let's clear something up right now. I think Alberta and Calgary, they say, is the Texas of Canada, and I would agree in terms of culture and the whole Southern hospitality stereotype. That is a good one, and it's true. So that's one thing I can say right off the bat. You will absolutely feel welcomed here in a way that, and I mean, even in big cities, like I'm talking even Dallas and Houston, where, for me over the past, let's say 5 years, I would say Toronto has changed in that Toronto used to feel more welcoming, and now to me, Toronto feels a bit overwhelming. I grew up in Toronto. I went to high school and university in the city. I love Toronto for a lot of reasons. I think the feeling of the city has changed. And for that, well, this isn't an episode about Toronto, but there's a lot that's changed in Canada, both on a cultural level, on a vibe level, let's say, of the cities, specifically, again, Toronto GTA, and then on a political basis as well. So a few things motivating my relocation, but when it comes to you, I think the biggest thing to consider when relocating anywhere is, one, how permanent are we talking, because you can relocate somewhere for 6 months, a year, 5 years. It can be part of your short-term plan. It can be based on employment. It can be, so relocation is an interesting term because a lot of people feel like somehow that's forever, and it certainly doesn't have to be, right? I know a lot of people that have done a year in Australia, a year here, a year there. And Americans, for sure, there's a culture of living in different states because of, family needs, educational needs. A mom moves to a state because her kid is going to be in university or college there for 4 years. I find Americans are more amenable to the idea of moving states, and they'll just kind of pack up a U-Haul and bring their life across the country. They're a little bit more willing than what I've seen in Canada. Now, in Europe, I think people also migrate, but I would say they're also less likely because the cultural contrast is larger. But you do see it too, right? You see people from England living in Spain because of the weather. You see people, whatever. Vacation homes. So that's another option. And definitely on the Canadian side, you've got that Snowbird culture of heading down to Florida. There are parts of Florida that I think are more Woodbridge, which is a northern neighborhood in Toronto, for anyone that doesn't know, where a bunch of Italians live, or Italian Canadians, I should say. There are parts of Florida north of Miami that are they get a huge migration of Canadians in the winter. So, these patterns are not new, but you've just got to figure out what works for you and what are the terms of your relocation. And the biggest thing I hear from people, no matter how compelling Texas or Florida or other states are, is of course family. And it's the hardest part, hands down. I'm glad I get to that in the first 5 minutes because it really is the number one thing that's going to make this difficult for you. Is if you have family, friends, extended family, whoever your kind of day-to-day network is, it's hard if you can't just drive to their house and have a coffee or, meet up on a Friday night. kind of thing. It definitely creates more intentional time together, and you're planning holidays or longer visits, and there's a commute involved. Now, depending on how far away your family is, that commute changes. You might like that there's a commute depending on your relations with your family. So, but I would say right off the bat, no matter any of these other characteristics of, okay, do I get a visa, or what, what's the housing market, politics, weather, cost of living, like you can have the nicest house, you can be in the best possible weather. The hardest thing is leaving your people. So that's a big, big decision, and usually why relocation is a time-bound thing based on employment. People go where the money is, and then they're sending that money maybe back to family, and or, have a longer term plan to return to where the bulk of their family is. For my situation, a little bit harder because I've got family in two major spots, because when you get married, you get a whole other family, and in my case, they're in two different continents. So maybe you're dealing with that. If your whole family is within an hour of each other, I could see where it's difficult. I definitely have friends that say, yes, absolutely Texas, but family. And so I know it's the biggest hang up. There's no amount of information, me saying, there's zero income tax in the state. There's no amount of information that can transcend that emotional component of relocation to Texas or anywhere in the world. So just want to get that on the table, because it's a huge piece of it, and people act like they would move, they act like they would do something, but really they wouldn't. And most people that are coming here or anywhere in the US, they're relocating because their daughter lives here for work, and so the parents move because they want to be near the grandkids, or like a lot of relocation is coming closer to your family. That's the whole point of relocation. So usually I see it's for work, or it's to reunify with family, or maybe for studying, right? Those are kind of the big relocation terms. And fair enough. So if you're considering Texas, yes, the houses on Instagram are alluring, but consider the emotional components as well. And leaving family is no small thing. It's the hardest part of being here when we're here. And we've been so fortunate that family comes to visit, and a big part of finding a place to be here was, hey, we need a guest room because there's going to be, and I would say we've got visitors like once a month. So when we're here, there is somebody coming here once a month to see us, more or less, which I love. It means hosting. It's awesome. It just factored into your plans. So why Texas in particular? There's no secret, or it's no secret that, there's a huge migration in the past few years from California and other places to Texas. They've made it a really business-friendly place. So a lot of businesses have moved their headquarters. Notably, you've got Elon Musk's whole ecosystem slowly trickling out of California here. So he's a big one. There's a Samsung plant outside of Austin. That's another kind of notable big one. Microsoft, Google, Apple all have offices here. Austin definitely sort of the startup tech hub, I would say. Houston's a bit more known for oil and gas. Dallas, of course, financial services more. So Dallas has got a huge number of wealthy individuals and private wealth management. So that's in Dallas. And San Antonio is growing, I would say. I don't know the predominant industry there. But it's what they call the Texas Triangle, would be Houston, Dallas, San Antonio. Or from north to south, Dallas, San Antonio to the north, southwest, and then Houston all the way at the bottom of the state there. And Austin kind of nestled in the middle. Austin is the capital. We can get into why Austin. I think the big draw with Texas, as we said, why do people relocate? Well, jobs, opportunities in that regard. And certainly Texas is growing at an astounding rate. And then you mix that with affordable housing. Well, affordable compared to other states. And again, depending on where you are in Texas, of course, cities are more expensive than living a little bit outside. Austin is the most expensive in terms of housing. So affordability is relative to where you want to be, right? I mean, and this is where I just want to, for those Canadians listening in, I would say, people talk about Canadian housing market. No, really, most people are talking about the GTA. They're talking about Ontario, right? Maybe they're talking about Quebec. But even the Quebec market, if you're looking at Montreal or Quebec City, like it's more affordable, right? And then if you go East Coast Canada, if you go into the Central Canada, there's a ton of affordable real estate. So it's not Canada, it's not Canadian real estate. It's like we're talking West Coast Vancouver and surrounding, and we're talking about the GTA. So I just want to be specific when we say housing market and things, because you know what? If you're in downtown Austin, it's a bit pricey as well. And if you were to compare a one bedroom apartment, yeah, Toronto's probably a bit more, but realistically, you're still paying to be in downtown Austin or downtown Dallas, and it's more than if you're willing to be in the suburbs, and that's just true across the board. So, yes, there are affordable trends in Texas, but it really depends. If you're looking on Instagram, you see this huge house, it's like, okay, but where is it? And so you do have to think about that. You can absolutely get some crazy kind of, like, you can get a single family home for, you know, 290,000. But again, where are you? And I don't mean you could be in a safe place, a safe, decent neighborhood, but that's not downtown Dallas. So we've got to compare apples to apples. And Dallas, I would say their metroplex with Fort Worth included is very similar to Toronto. I would say the roads in Dallas are more better defined, like the highways, you can really get around. They move a lot of people and they do it well. Toronto's still kind of getting that sorted out with the highways, to say the very least. I mean, I don't want to just compare this to Toronto, right? Like, you can also compare it to cities in Europe. And I mean, then we get into a whole discussion of like North America versus Europe. And there's so many differences. People will say, the food of Europe, and absolutely, I cannot debate that. I think the food quality and just the adherence to stricter standards for chemicals and what goes in products, Europe's got that way more figured out than America for sure. But why Texas? Let's delve into a little bit more of the state. So as we've said, there's definitely that Southern hospitality culture. You'll feel it. People call me ma'am. People open doors. It's expected. The people that move here, I find from other places, like that and want to preserve that. And so you've got this selection bias. People worry about others flooding the state and it changing. I think the people that move here like the way it is and want to preserve it. Maybe not everyone, of course, but if you move somewhere, whether for a year or for 10 years, I think I would, as somebody that's traveled extensively over the past 10 years, I would highly encourage you to immerse yourself in the local culture and respect it. There's a reason that it's worked in the place that it is, right? There's a reason that things are the way they are. And the sooner you can embrace that, I think the sooner you'll come to admire the place, and more importantly, the people and the culture, if you can really immerse yourself in the way that they live. And that's not just for Texas. So I would say Texas, if you like that Southern hospitality, you are absolutely going to love it here and fit in just fine. Throw a couple of y'alls and ma'ams in there and you'll be good. In terms of the different cities, I would say, as I started off, Dallas is really kind of an 8 to 9 million, if I have that right, metroplex. You've got Dallas and Fort Worth, so two major cities. I really love the neighborhoods of Grapevine and South Lake. Those are kind of the higher end. It's near the airport. They have a little lake. They do cute Christmas parades and things like that. Grapevine calls themselves the capital of Christmas or something like that for Texas. They really go all out for Christmas time. So Dallas has a really kind of conservative feel. Most of Dallas feels just like a big city. You've got highways, you got lots of buildings. Downtown Dallas, I would say, is okay in the daytime. South Dallas can be dicey. I didn't feel the safest, if I'm honest. I wouldn't hang out downtown Dallas. There's so much kind of around the city that being actually downtown isn't where I would focus my time. North Dallas is exploding in terms of housing and development. So Frisco, Prosper, Salina, up the North Dallas Tollway. And if we go down to Houston, our biggest qualm was the humidity and, of course, hurricanes. We really wasn't into living in a place with hurricanes, and Houston definitely has them. The culture, though, is so cool. I think there's a lot of heart in Houston, and you really feel that. It's like the most strong Southern hospitality, the real kind of South. You feel like it's just comforting from the food to the people. Houston's got this comforting feeling, and then there's a lot of culture, like art, and the city itself just feels vibrant in a way that you don't get in Dallas. Dallas is a bit more cold and corporate from my experience, at least city wise. Um, Houston, well, Dallas, I have to mention there are the tornadoes. So one big thing we did try out Dallas, and you know, for me, being woken up to a tornado warning, having to go into the innermost room of the house, it's just not something I grew up with. If you ask Texans, they're cool with it. Just like if you ask someone from Florida, they're kind of used to evacuations and used to boarding up their houses. It's just not something I grew up with and not something I wanted to live in. So that's something to consider, is definitely weather. If you're at the coast, or if you're north Dallas up into Oklahoma, you're dealing with Tornado Alley, and there are sirens in Dallas where you will hear warnings and sirens going off. I remember one day I was in a meeting and they were testing the sirens, and it was just enough to make me say, you know what, I don't see this as a longer term play. Pair that with Austin being such a tech hub, and really what works for me professionally, that was alluring as well. And Austin has a smaller feel. So Austin, I think the city itself is maybe 1.5 million. It really gives me like Toronto 10 years ago kind of vibes. And I liked that. I liked it. Now, also consider Austin in the city is very progressive. Outside of Austin, a bit more conservative or Republican. So you're dealing with it. They could, there's a slogan, kind of keep Austin surrounded. The idea being that the city is progressive, but you want to keep that balance of conservatism versus being progressive in check. And I think that's an interesting motto in terms of at least having different points of view. When we stop being able to have different points of view, we're in trouble, you know? So I like that there is a healthy amount of just different opinions. Whenever you're in a silo and everybody agrees, if you only talk to people that agree with you, I think you got a big problem. So, I like that there's political and ideological diversity when you're chatting with people. I think that's really important to retain. And certainly in the city, it's way more, as I said, sort of progressive and liberal, and that's siloed into the city. But most cities are, right? Like that rural versus urban divide is not just an Austin thing. I just feel it's extremely pronounced, whereas Dallas as a city is more conservative overall, and then surrounding areas are conservative or Republican, right leaning. Houston, I'd say I got a right leaning feel. San Antonio as well, but San Antonio, similar size feeling to Austin. Huge Mexican community. I mean, the Mexican culture is absolutely prevalent all throughout Texas, no question. I mean, the proximity to Mexico, along with how many Mexicans live here, along with the historical relevance and history of Mexican, just Texas, Tejas, like we've got, there's Mexico pretty much running through the veins of Texas, no question about it. So, you'll absolutely see the influence of the Mexican culture, which is also a very warm, friendly, predominantly Catholic culture that you're going to experience Spanish speaking. So a lot of, going into a Walmart and having staff that doesn't speak English and speaks Spanish is a common occurrence. A lot of the trades and construction fields, you've got a lot of Mexican construction workers, trade workers. They're in the trades quite predominantly, and that culture runs through. I think it mixes. It's definitely part of the Bible Belt, and Texas is certainly a Christian state overwhelmingly. And so you have Texans, white Texans that are Christian, and then you've got Christian but Catholic Mexicans. And I think that there's a synergy there in terms of values because of that religious background that you see really strongly, where the values are similar. And so even if the language is different and culturally there might be some differences, I think the religions being similar is what brings common ground to, let's German immigrants, for example. There's a huge around south of Austin. There's Fredericksburg, there's New Braunfels, there's Gröne. Those cities, towns are German settlements. And so you've got this big kind of German influence and German population that's in that central sort of part of Texas. And it's interesting to see the interplay of the German and the Mexican and how those two come together, of the settlers. And it's a fascinating thing for someone that, I mean, for me, I guess growing up in Canada, it was the English and the French, and they had their dynamic. And so here I would say you kind of see that settler German or European influence coming in with the Mexican, Spanish feeling. So those are some interesting cultural kind of threads that run through all of Texas, but certainly I feel it being in Central Texas. Austin, as I've noted, is kind of this tech hub. You've got it's really a university town as well as the capital. So if you've been to Ottawa in Canada, I think, but Austin is much bigger than Ottawa, and I think there's more to do. But you've got a similar setup of, Parliament or the Capitol, in that building, and then you've got a lot of kind of young energy with the university, or college, I should say. College football here is wild. Houston and Dallas have NFL teams, so you've got bigger football and different sports franchises. Austin is smaller, and so you've got just a wild amount of support for college football, which is very different from anything I've ever seen. College games will draw crazy crowds. The stadiums are huge. Football is absolutely Texan. So if you like football, there's a point for Texas for sure. In terms of food, as we've mentioned, you've got this Mexican influence. So Tex-Mex is huge. Barbecue, absolutely huge. But if you're in the city, you're dealing with metropolitan, so you're getting everything. You can really find, Japanese, Indian, Thai, kind of think any other city across the board, bigger city, and you'll have options. But the local cuisine, I would say, is a lot of tacos and a lot of barbecue. Those two things are huge. People take brisket very seriously, and absolutely getting tacos from a food truck is the way to go. Some of the best food you can get, if you're talking authentic Mexican, at least, is coming out of a food truck, and lots of other vendors. It's a cool thing to see, especially in Austin, the prevalence of food trucks and how you really can be the little guy and just absolutely crush it from a food perspective, where if you had to have a physical location like a restaurant, it's just a lot more money, and so if your concept works, I think it's a really cool place to test that out in Austin, because people are willing, and there's a culture of food trucks here that I didn't really see in Toronto, and other cities don't necessarily have. So Austin's got a big food truck scene. All other parts of Texas too, but I've really felt it in Austin, which is cool. I like the small business idea. I like that you can have your thing going on and people will support it. Farmers markets are big. I know that they exist everywhere else, but somehow I feel that the local community will really rally around farmers markets and local vendors. And I like that. I like that you can go and meet the guy that grew your tomatoes. It kind of adds to that Southern hospitality, or that kind of friendly culture. You feel like you can get engaged at a local level. And maybe that's just me and the stage I'm at, and I didn't really do that when I was younger, so could totally be me. But definitely an opportunity for that here, and you really feel welcome no matter what city you're in. I think if you're considering different cities, I know Austin has this kind of like influencer, young vibe, definitely does, but you've got that tech scene that's really ingrained because of the companies putting investments here. So it's also a serious professional place, if you will. Certainly healthcare across the board. I mean, Dallas and Houston have huge hospitals. So if you're on the hospital track, you've got opportunities. Houston and Dallas do feel like big cities, though. Houston is so sprawling too. Um, West Houston, you've got Katy. That's kind of the suburb that I might think about. There's the Woodlands, which is North Houston. Also, a nice master plan community came out, I think, in the 80s or so. It's really kind of well done. They kept trees. It looks really fancy. So I like that north part of Houston or West Houston. Being directly in the city for me is just not where I'm at currently. But if you like city living, Dallas and Houston certainly have the condo walk out your door and be by cafes and things. They definitely have that vibe, and that exists even in the smaller little neighborhoods kind of north of the downtown, and I would recommend those. Like Houston and Dallas as downtown hubs, I would say things kind of shut down at night. Like you're not getting the same feeling as like New York or Toronto or actually San Francisco. I was going to say San Francisco, but when I spent time there, I found that it wasn't really like a party city, things kind of shut down because people would go home for the most part. So yeah, the city is not a nightlife kind of place. People really go out closer to where they live in neighborhoods. And again, these kind of small, really quaint restaurants or bars, neighborhood spots that are really great. So you've got options. San Antonio, I think, is the one place that if you're coming in, like you could do a weekend or even a day trip in San Antonio and really hit the main spots downtown, like go to the Alamo, walk the River Walk. There are a couple of churches. Um, there's a convention center there if you're there for an event or something. But really, a day of kind of the River Walk and the Alamo and looking around downtown, some of the historical monuments, I think you're good in terms of the downtown core. So San Antonio is probably like a day trip, or you can tack it on with seeing New Braunfels, has the Kamal River, really nice to go down if you want to go tubing, and that's open like I want to say May to at least now, like let me see, May till October, something like that. Fair is decent, and so it's really great when it gets hot. And that's one thing I do have to get to the weather. The weather's a thing. There's no way around it. It gets hot, and I would say they talk about extreme weather again, like as I mentioned, hurricanes and tornadoes are what you're really dealing with. Again, hurricanes on the coast, tornadoes kind of more north, Texas, like Dallas and north of that into Oklahoma. So, you know, but extreme, I don't know about extreme. People prepare, but more often than not, you're fine. Austin has the most sunny days, I think, out of any of the cities I've mentioned so far. So, and Austin is quite protected. I think there have been a few tornadoes, but really hurricanes don't reach up this far north, and then the tornadoes don't really come this far south. So it's kind of this sweet spot, little gem, I think, that I was gonna say hidden gem, but not really. You got millions of people here. So it's not that great of a kept secret, and I would say the weather is part of that. You definitely get a lot of sunshine, but it does get hot, and I'm talking, you know, June, May, June until again end of September, October, you can be in the 90s, which is like 33, 34 degrees Celsius. It's hot. And August, I would say, is the most intolerable for people that are not used to that. But you're just dealing with going outside early morning or in the evening. The interesting thing about Texas is that it doesn't get cool at night, though. So, like, it can be really hot in the day, but it doesn't cool down. So, it's like you're at 105 degrees, and then at night, it's still like, I guess it does cool down, but just relatively, it just feels hot. Like, it'll be 105 in the day, and then at night, it's still like 95 and then maybe 90, and you're like, oh, it's so hot. Which is why early morning is when it's coolest. That's the best time if you're trying to do anything physical, in my opinion. Of course, when the sun goes down, there's some relief, but it does stay hot for longer, which was new for me. I would say October through even September. Like if you like summer weather, you're good. And I would say September through till May, even June, you're good in terms of, okay, winter is, maybe a light jacket. You're not going past freezing much. You're definitely not shoveling snow. Um, it's in the Sun Belt, all of Texas, and so that was part of the consideration. I would say a lot of people are traveling July and August. And so if you have that luxury, I would say go visit Canada, go visit Europe, go be elsewhere July and August, and then the rest of the year you're pretty good. And I'll take it over like 6 months of gray. For me, I need the sun, so that's my thing. Depends what you like. If you like that kind of melancholy, Vancouver, West Coast, Seattle kind of thing, if you like it gray and wet, then this is not for you. So know what kind of weather you're into. I think you get 3 seasons here. I mean, Texans would say, yeah, you have 4 seasons. Like it gets hot and then hotter and then excruciating. But you get that kind of fall feeling. I would say that comes in kind of late October, depending on the year, into February, where like again, sweater weather, grab a light jacket. I'm Canadian, so I'm biased in terms of like, I don't find it that cold because I'm used to worse. People here will have like a full-blown coat on, and if it gets close to freezing, things shut down, people stop delivering things. There's just not infrastructure here. There are no salt trucks, so it's an interesting thing to see. Where I remember we just moved here, we're getting a couch, no, a couch and a table. They're being delivered, and the company literally said, due to inclement weather, we can't deliver your items today. And I looked outside, and it was like perfectly sunny. It was just a bit cold, but it was like a beautiful, beautiful day. But if there's any chance of rain and then a freeze on the streets, everything shuts down. So that's interesting. And they would call that extreme weather or extreme cold, but it's just extreme because the infrastructure here isn't set up for that. And that's where things, but that was like a couple of days. And again, it's really due to it's your comfort level, right? So you can absolutely, in my opinion, you can drive, you're fine. If the roads freeze, you've just got to be mindful that no one's coming to salt them, no one's coming to fix that. And people will just wait it out. So if you consider that extreme, then it's extreme. But to me, you're good. You just might not be able to get a couch or Uber Eats for a day or two. And that's probably, you're dealing with that like December, January. And again, I thought it was a beautiful day. I went outside, I had a lovely day. There was nothing inherently bad, but they're cautious and they don't want icing of the roads, and fair enough. So I think another thing, and this is okay, like why Texas or relocating. I mean, there's natural beauty all over this country and all over the world. So no place is gonna, you can find natural beauty in any place. And so this is a hard sell to say, yeah, Texas is the most beautiful. I mean, there's stunning lakes in Switzerland. Canada has some gorgeous mountains, forests, lakes. I mean, go to South America and see stunning waterfalls and rainforests, and like it's just the world is a beautiful place, and you've got to decide what you want to live in proximity to. And so if you're in a city, like for example, to me, one of the most beautiful cities to live in would be Rio de Janeiro. I mean, you've got some beautiful European cities, Zurich, Bern. You can literally see mountains from the downtown. And by downtown, I mean, it's a small city core. Things are low, the buildings are low. Like you've got to decide what kind of ambiance, you're really looking for. But to me, the best interplay of city and nature is Rio, hands down. It's such a stunning, like you've got vines and big buildings, and then the beach is right there, and huge kind of Sugarloaf Mountain, and then like it's just urban sprawl amidst nature. They've somehow beautifully interwoven. It's almost like you still feel like you're in a in a forest, in nature, but they're these huge high rises. So Rio's done well for that. I would say Austin, you definitely feel it when you're in the city. There are parts of it that are better developed than others. Some of it feels a bit kind of even small town, kind of North Houston is nice, but then you drive in and you'll see lots of broken down homes from hurricanes. People don't fix the homes. You got some rundown neighborhoods. Like Texas is really interesting where you've got some places that are really built up and other places that just look like they haven't seen human life in a while, but they're sort of boarded up things going on. So there's a bit of that, different parts of Texas. That was kind of different and shocking for me, being from a place where most things are developed. You know, if you're in New York kind of thing, where it's like, no, I mean, places might be unoccupied, but downtown New York is like all developed, right? Austin isn't that, and parts of Houston aren't that, and even parts of Dallas, you know, aren't that, where you feel kind of the need for some updates and some love. So there's that. There's kind of like, it feels sort of tumbleweed, dusty kind of feeling in some parts of the cities. But in terms of hiking, hunting, beaches, you can absolutely, Texas is a huge state, and so you can get desert mountain like, you know, West Texas. You can go south and have beaches like Galveston or Padre Island all along that coast. There's Port Aransas, there's Corpus Christi. Now, are the beaches of Texas, do they live up to the hype? Is there hype? I don't know. Is it Miami? No. Is it Turks and Caicos or Aruba? No. It's not the Caribbean. I'd say the closest, if you go to South Padre, which is pretty near Brownsville, it's right by the border of Mexico. That's the closest you're going to get to, well, a Mexican beach, because you're pretty much right beside Mexico. And so, you know, Mexico's got some stunning beaches and the water is clear and light and beautiful. And so you got to go kind of to the southernmost point of the state, in my opinion, to get a beach worth beaching at, if you will. Be mindful of those jellyfish. I got stung by one. So that does exist. I would say Galveston, the water's kind of brown, you know, it's not really enticing to me. You do have, as I mentioned earlier, New Braunfels and Kamal River, lots of rivers in Texas that and lakes that you can absolutely swim in. A lot of them are man-made, which is interesting. They'll reroute. There's a Colorado River that kind of gets rerouted through west of Austin and then into Austin, and so there's a lot of kind of man-made stuff going on with the water supply in this state, which is also new to me because Ontario's got so many just natural fresh water lakes, so that was new. But certainly swimming is a thing, lake life is a thing. It gets so hot here that being by a body of water is a good call. Definitely a huge pool culture here, so that's popular, and you're really getting, again, what? I mean, if you're willing to heat your pool, you can open your pool in March, mid-March, like spring break, people open up, and you could really be running until end of October, if not into November, you know? If you've got a hot tub, for sure, all year long, no problem. Although in August, you're not going to want to be in a hot tub, I think. But, yeah, a pool, I mean, 100%, you could even leave it open all year because it's probably not going to freeze, you know? So there isn't that, like the Canadian season, you're talking like May if you're really pushing, like maybe May 2-4 weekend into September. Again, kind of push it and heat it and kind of keep it. So you're talking May to September. Here you're talking March to November. So you get a few more months out of it for sure. And most of those months are more pleasant. You can actually run into the issue of the water getting too hot, which is an interesting thing. Some people here have like a pool heater, but also like a pool cooler. Like you can cool down the water, like using electricity, which is so interesting. I'm like, why don't you just add more water? But it can get kind of bathtub level hot. So that's an interesting thing I had never really thought of. So yeah, you got the weather giving you a bit of that. We do deal with some drought type of issues here because of the amount of sun and lack of rain. So again, that kind of water management, water supply, you've got some restricted watering for your lawn. Most people here have irrigation systems. Like that came standard with our house, and most houses and places have irrigation systems, which is interesting because it's definitely not a standard feature in Canada. So people definitely water their lawns, but there's sort of restrictions on it depending on your neighborhood and the city, county level stuff going on. So water is an interesting resource that they're really working to preserve and also sort of manage, which again was something I had never really been exposed to. You just used water, but it's that California desert kind of all those western areas where you do deal with drought and water supply, and that is something to consider here for sure. I can't say it's impacted us day to day, although water quality is a thing. So compared to living in Switzerland where your water is coming from a really pristine lake or like a beautiful mountain, which okay, there have been, I just don't want to, nothing is perfect. There have been reports of PFOAs and other forever chemicals coming from mountain source water in Switzerland, and so there have been some issues there. They do treat the water there. Water coming from lakes does get treated, so it's not completely pristine as you might think in a Ricola ad. There are some things going on with water supply in Switzerland. That being said, higher quality, hands down, than Texas water, and so that's probably an investment that is imperative if you're here, which is to filter your water because you're probably getting either well water or maybe it's coming from a lake, but again, it's like a man-made lake, or reservoir, and so you really ought to be filtering your water if you're living here. And that's something that I hadn't consciously thought about previously, although it just depends on your tolerance level. I'm sure there are people here that drink the tap water and they do just fine. So something to consider. Okay, so you've got outdoor activities. Remember, it gets hot. Go south to South Padre Island for a beach. Hiking all over the place. A special gem to me is west of Austin. You've got the hill country. It extends west of Austin, then all the way down towards San Antonio. Beautiful. Hill country is like, it's reminiscent of Italy, of like French Riviera. Like it's just got some beautiful, the difference is the architecture. And so you'll kind of, the nature is these rolling hills, beautiful trees, kind of, it's that drier heat. And so actually Fredericksburg is one of the biggest areas for wineries outside of Napa in California, which I had no idea. So if you're here, you like wine, Fredericksburg is 100% a place to visit. That's you can do a day trip. You can also stay overnight and kind of make a weekend of it. It's similar to the Niagara region in that you can do wine tours and things. A lot of grapes are actually grown north of Fredericksburg in Lubbock, Texas, but Texas certainly has a wine and olive oil kind of industry that I hadn't heard anything about. So I'm hoping more restaurants will put Texas wine in there. They usually carry California, and it's like, we're in Texas. There's a huge like Texas proud kind of mentality, and so I'm hoping they can get Texan wines in restaurants and continue that trend. Okay, some more kind of nitty gritty stuff. I mean, in terms of schools, if you're looking at schools, it's same as everywhere else. I think in terms of like, okay, there are better school districts. You got private and public schools. You've got a lot. So one thing that is here that I didn't see as much growing up is there's an absolute popularity of homeschooling. And it's not just like the stereotypical, like, oh, you have to be ultra religious or like your farming family or like you're weird. Like people, there are all these stereotypes about homeschoolers. There's a real culture of homeschooling here. And then co-ops where those homeschooling kids kind of go off with other homeschooling kids and they do a bunch of activities and things. And so you homeschool and it allows for kids to either be kind of really into athletics or really into a certain hobby or skill that they're developing while also finishing school. It also lends itself to the remote lifestyle, if your family does travel or have multiple residences or is interested in, being in a couple different spots throughout the year. So, I mean, homeschooling is certainly a thing here. It's allowed here. It's, I wouldn't say it's like 50-50 or anything, but certainly a concept that exists. And then charter schools as well. So there's a lot of choice here. If you're willing to pay, get a private education. If you want a public education, then you just need to think about the district. And again, thinking about the values that are being imparted to your kid, city versus rural. You're just getting a different, whether it's more traditional mindset or that progressive mindset. And you've just got to make that call based on what's important to you and how you want your kids to be thinking. So that's something to consider. But again, that's something to consider no matter where you're at. I think the homeschooling distinction is one of note in the state, and a lot of resources and communities around that. And so that's interesting versus being like the one kid that's homeschooled and you're considered weird. It's like, no, there's actually, there actually developed communities around that. So that was a new thing. What else we got? Well, we talked about the job market, a little bit about, Austin's tech, Houston's energy, got healthcare, and then Dallas is kind of that financial hub. They are thinking about opening up a Texas stock exchange, from what I understand, sort of hearing little whispers about that, which would be interesting. I mean, in terms of so Texas does have its own power grid as well. I like the independence. Texas really, if you want to talk values as a state, if you're Republican or Democrat, it doesn't really matter. It's like this independence that I do appreciate about Texans, where it's like they value their state level autonomy. They value personal, individual autonomy and decision making, personal freedoms, and depending on what you think, if you're somebody that likes personal freedoms, they definitely err on the side of that versus government intervention, and that comes with pros and cons, just like anything. So, something to consider more on the, I suppose, technical side of things. We've talked, there's no state income tax, but property taxes are relatively high. They are dependent on where you live. So, 1, 2, 3% property tax. So on a house that's, let's say, 500,000, you're paying 10,000, 12,000, 14,000 in property tax a year. So that's something, but again, that's dependent on where you choose to live. And so in a way, you have a way to kind of mitigate that, because if your house, instead of income tax where what you make, you get taxed on, this is really based on your decision of where you live, but it's certainly higher than what you'd see in Canada at the very least. So you have that kind of, as I've said, 1, 2, 3% range, can be more or less, but that's what you're dealing with in terms of property taxes. And then there are homestead exemptions, which most people get. People here also protest their property taxes, which is interesting. So every year you're going to actually protest and see, hey, based on the market value, because the county will say, okay, your house is worth X, and you'll go in and say, no, and you'll protest to get that value down. Does it always work? No, but it's an interesting concept. Nobody in Canada protests their taxes, and certainly not every year in such a broad way. Of course, you can, check in with what you're being taxed in Canada, but it's sort of to go against a property. It's not commonplace to go against a property tax appraisal in Canada. If your house gets appraised at X, people usually just pay it. And so that's another nod to I suppose, individual rights or the ability to question the government in Texas. And it's a common process. So most people in our neighborhood protest their appraisal. Like most people will do it, and there are services that do it for you. And so it's an interesting thing here, as well as the homestead exemption. Another interesting thing to look into if you're here. Grocery prices, I'd say it's actually on par, like meat and eggs and these kind of products, that this basket of goods that people will consider. I wouldn't say it's much cheaper than what you're getting in Canada or Florida. I mean, there might be certain products here and there, but overall, like, you're going to the grocery store, you go to Costco, you're spending $200-300 depending on the size of your family, like, and it's US dollars, right? So if we're comparing that, I mean, if you're in Europe, the US dollar is weaker than the euro. If you're in Canada, The US dollar is stronger, so your purchasing power depends. But again, if you're living here, you're probably earning in US dollars, so that just goes out in the wash. Utilities, I'd say similar. Electricity is a bit cheaper here. Gas, like natural gas, you're actually, depending on where you live, but where we're at, it's actually really expensive. So to heat your home is expensive. That just has to do with the way the infrastructure is put in, and it's not lines. It's like it gets filled in a tank. And so they have all these kind of fees. And so it's quite expensive to heat your home with gas. So that is something that's different. Although if you're in rural Canada, a lot of homes are heated with propane, and so that gets expensive too. But if you can heat with electricity here, electricity is the cheaper utility for sure. Transportation, you are 100% going to be driving. Doesn't matter where you are in Texas. They're trying to do trains from Dallas to Houston and this Texas Triangle concept, but as it stands today, you absolutely need a car. Everybody drives. There are no real subways. You got some kind of bus systems and things. I mean, if you can't afford it, but you can't, because there are cheap cars here. Cars are a dime a dozen. Really, everybody has a car. So very, very car dependent state. All the cities, parking is pretty accessible, reasonably priced. Downtown is more expensive, but you can still find parking. It's very, very car reliant here for sure when it comes to transportation. So there's that to consider. And then healthcare. Healthcare is a big one. You're going to be paying for healthcare. You have zero income tax. So you've got zero income tax, but then you're going to be paying for property tax if you own a home, and you're going to be paying for healthcare. Now, there are different ways to do that. It depends if you're employed here, right? Your employer probably has a plan. There are also these different, they're actually Christian based. Some of them aren't, but it's more like co-ops where you share expenses. From what I've heard, you actually get better coverage if you go with a co-op, and they'll pay for things. So the biggest thing with health insurance here is you have these kind of in-network versus out-network providers. And so if you choose a practitioner of any kind that isn't in-network, your coverage is often not as good. And so you're kind of forced into using providers that are on the list, on that list of your insurance company. A huge one is Blue Cross Blue Shield. There's Aetna and others, United. They vary. You'll probably go with what your employer gives you. They have spending accounts that you fund and your employer funds, and then you get a card. And so certain things are covered. So if you have a medical expense, like certain prescriptions or different medical products, like blood pressure monitor, or I don't know, humidifier, or different things like that you would find at a Walgreens, like at a pharmacy. They're usually HSA, health savings account, approved, and so you can use that card that your, again, employer is kind of matching and funding a little bit. So those are kind of smaller purchases that you'll have. And then it's sort of like insurance for a car or something, where you'll have a deductible. So you have a deductible, which is how much money you spend, and then you have an out-of-pocket maximum. And then there are these different percentages. And so it gets kind of hairy. And honestly, it was really new to me, because you go in and if you go and get a coffee, you know that it's going to cost you $5 or whatever it is. If you go into a hospital or you go to a medical provider, you really don't know what you're paying until you get that bill. And so that kind of surprise sticker shock is a new thing to me, because in Canada that's not the case, but here you absolutely have the autonomy. You go to what provider you want. You have a huge range of providers that are on that provider list that are in network, so that your insurance accepts. There are preventative things that are covered. It's just like a whole new kind of world to navigate. And medical debt is a thing. I've been told it cannot hurt your credit. I'm not an expert, but I would say the healthcare world here, you're paying for it, but you pay for what you use. So you're not funding other people's care. There's absolutely a lot of controversy surrounding the level of care and how hospitals, insurance companies, and pharmaceutical companies, how they're all intertwined. There's the stats change regularly, but 1 in 4, 2 in 4 Americans have diabetes or pre-diabetes, maybe even 3 in 4 at this point. You've got a huge push for drugs as the solution. And so, there's it's an industry. Healthcare is an industry. And once you're in that system, you're dealing with pharmaceutical companies, you're dealing with insurance, you're dealing with medical institutions. You can come out of an emergency department and get hit with a bill from the hospital, from the physician, and then from additional, like if you're getting prescriptions or something as a result. So you can be hit with 2 medical bills just from being at the hospital. And some of the bigger events, if you have a baby, hospitals are billing like $100,000 for a birth. Now, what are you paying out of pocket? I've seen friends pay, $2,500 up to $5,000, up to maybe $10,000 out of pocket. Not much more than that if they're insured. So it's sort of like they bill exorbitant amounts, but as that end consumer, you're probably, if you're insured, you're probably not going over the $10,000 mark out of pocket. Again, totally depending on your plan. So I can't I can't guarantee you anything, but I will say it's just different. It's just different from what I grew up with. And you have to be more aware because you're a consumer. You're not going in and just getting whatever, but you have way more autonomy. You have more choice. The timeline, right? So if you don't like a timeline of a hospital, you just go to another hospital. Like you don't need, yes, you need a primary care physician. You need somebody that'll go and refer you to a specialist. But you can also just reach out to specialists here. And if they're on the list of your insurance, you just go. It might take you a bit to get an appointment, but in Canada, you might wait a year for an appointment with a specialist. At least I have been in this scenario. You can wait a year to see a specialist in Canada. Here, maybe a month or 2 or 3. And there are a lot of privatized clinics here. So just the level of choice here is completely different. And that's America-wide, so it's not a Texas thing, I guess. But just definitely something to consider. You have a lot of choice, but you might be paying out of pocket. And so it is a pay for what you use kind of idea. Like if you don't go to the doctor, you're not getting taxed 30, 40% of your income to pay for a healthcare system that you don't use. And so disproportionately, right, if you're younger, might not be as worth it to have that public system. But then when you get older, maybe it is worth it, right, to have that free system because maybe you're using it more. So it depends on your stage of life, how much you use medical care, conventional medical care, to make that decision. And certainly we could have a whole episode on that. So let's not go too far into the weeds, but you're going to be paying for health insurance here. You're going to be paying for property tax here. Those are the 2 big kind of hits when it comes to an expense, and then utilities. And of course, if you have a mortgage, but there's 0 state income tax. Federal income tax of the United States is 14% from what I know in this current moment. So you're dealing with a 14% tax and then those other bigger expenses. So that's what you're dealing with here, which probably, like, if so, 14% plus another 2%, like 10 grand on your home value. Again, that's dependent on where you choose to live. So not quite as correlated to it's not at all correlated to your income. Again, depending on where you live, you're going to probably have a bigger house if you make more money, right? But it's not directly correlated to your income. And then that health insurance is more based on family size and the plan you pick, that monthly fee. Again, not correlated to income. Now, people with more money are probably getting better plans, more coverage, lower deductible. They're paying more out of pocket every month. There is a whole community here that isn't insured at all, and that's problematic both from the healthcare standpoint as well as car insurance. So a lot of people are uninsured. I've seen more kind of beat down cars here than I ever saw in Canada or Europe. So there's kind of this uninsured community because it is an expense that, if you don't want to pay it, you don't pay it. I mean, you should. They are trying to institute kind of minimum levels of care. So if you have no insurance, you are legally required to be treated. A hospital is not going to turn you away, But so it's interesting, the levels of insurance here. But again, you're a consumer in the US for sure. And so you're a consumer for health insurance, you're a consumer for car insurance, you're a consumer for home insurance. These companies are it's more of a free market capitalistic system. They're trying to get your business. And so because of that, you're paying out of pocket, but you have choice. So that's the difference between, okay, you're taxed and the government will take care of it for you, versus you have these big industries, lots of competitors, or more competitors. You definitely have the big guys when it comes to health insurance and car insurance, but you have some choice. So that's what we're dealing with. The fun, nitty gritty stuff, but I do have to mention it because those are some of the stark differences I noticed when being here in that regard. Okay, some must-see attractions. We mentioned how beautiful Texas is. You got Big Bend National Park. We mentioned the Alamo. Weekend trips, you're probably going to, if you're driving, you can go to Oklahoma, New Mexico, or Louisiana. It's pretty easy to kind of fly around, like it is central. People will say it's not. Dallas and Houston are huge airport hubs, so you can really get anywhere. I was very spoiled with Pearson in Toronto. Got direct flights to so many different hubs. Houston and Dallas do as well, maybe not as many in Europe, but certainly if you're talking North America, and of course with layovers you can get anywhere, but Houston and Dallas are big hubs. Austin's airport is small and cute and really easy to navigate. You can get around the US, from Austin, 3-hour flight to Toronto, 3-hour flight to Vegas. You're kind of dealing with like 3 to 5 hours if you're trying to go to the corners of where else? Seattle. What did I fly? Maybe 4.5 hours to Seattle from here. So you can get anywhere, and Dallas and Houston are big hubs in terms of airports. Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about history and culture. I think social media, the housing market, just being thoughtful about, a house might look good, but where is it? Really think about that. And then in terms of relocation tips, I mean, you have to find a moving company, or if you're just coming here and gonna furnish a place, it really depends how long, what your deal is, right? How long are you gonna be here? Are you working here? Are you bringing a whole family here? Are you buying a house? Are you renting something? Are you going to buy a secondary residence where you're going to be here just for those winter months and be a bit of a snowbird? Like, what sort of relocation are we talking about? Because it's going to inform, like, if you're just going to buy a new house and furnish it here, well, you don't need a U-Haul. If you're coming cross state, yeah, grab a U-Haul, drive down. A lot of people here will build custom homes or wait for a new home to be built. There are a ton of new builds, so lots of opportunities to get into a new house here, and a single family home, which I'm seeing less of that, at least in the GTA. It's more kind of townhouses and multifamily or condos. So certainly if you're looking for a single family house, you got lots of options in Texas. There's a lot of space and they're willing to use it. They're willing to build. So, you could have a house built, people will rent a home nearby until their home is finished, or you can wait till it's done and then come, there are options. And then in terms of visas, that might be a bigger discussion. You absolutely need to talk to a lawyer, an accountant about your individual situation. I cannot advise on, individual matters, but certainly, at least with Canada, there are lots of visa programs, and the US is quite friendly to Canadians, which is lovely. And of course, if you're from anywhere else, there are options available to you. So I'd say speak with a good immigration lawyer on that, depending on what you're trying to do here. But if you're a Canadian and you just want to hang for up to 6 months a year, you can do that without a visa. If you have, as I said, a second kind of vacation property, you could totally just do that. So are you coming here full time? Are you coming here half the year? Do you want to be by the water? Do you want to be in the Texas Hill Country? Do you want to be in a city? What are you trying to do? Are you here for work? If so, does your employer sponsor a visa for you? Do you get a visa and then apply to stuff? And by stuff, I mean jobs. So you have options. Maybe I could do a second episode kind of outlining the different visa categories, because this is getting long. And that would be for anywhere in the US anyway, so it might be relevant for people. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I've done extensive research on it for my own situation, so that might be something that we could chat about in another episode. But figure out a visa of some sort that allows you to be here for the amount of time that you want to be here, depending on what kind of relocation you're planning. And then get ready to have lots of iced tea, barbecue, and it gets hot. So but maybe plan some travel in July and August if you can. Otherwise, be near a pool, water, and be ready to stay inside. Now, I will say, right, if you're in Canada, December, January, the difference is when it's cold, you can keep adding layers. When it's hot, there's only so much you can take off, you know? So, water and shade are your best friend if you're in Texas. I hope this has been useful. I can't cover everything of a whole state. Try to get into the weeds a little bit while keeping it also a broad overview. I hope it's been fun for you to learn a little bit about Texas living, and I really hope you'll come and have a visit. I got a couple guides that I'll see if I can rustle up so you can look at recommendations of places I've been, places I recommend. It's a fun state to visit. Definitely something you could do. You could do the wine country, Fredericksburg, in a long weekend. So it's a fun spot and definitely worth a trip. Certainly a long weekend, and you might just fall in love with the Lone Star State. So I hope you have a great rest of your day and take good care until we meet again.